friends, and happy Friday. And what a beautiful one it is. A beautiful sunny day today. I actually had an invitation to do one of the things that I'm really addicted to and have been for years, which is playing golf. And I declined in one of those rare occasions. So my son and my nephew actually went out, and I declined because I have a commitment to you, which is to put out this video today regarding a very important subject that I get asked all the time. And that is, if your claim is denied, what do? What's your next move? And even though it may seem straightforward, it's not. There's a bit of confusion, but at the same time, the WSIB kind of makes it look like your only option is to appeal it, because that's what you hear all the time. Yeah, I decided, I denied it, appeal it. I decided, I denied it, appeal it. I'm sure you've heard this. It seems like one of their favorite things. And I mean, why? Well, sometimes they just want to hand it off to somebody else to do the work for them. And I've seen this lots of times where an appeals officer will call me and say, "Hey, Joe, I got this file here and, you know, it shouldn't be here. It's not ready. I'm going to have to send it back upstairs. What are your thoughts?" And oftentimes I would say, you know, I did indicate that to the person I was dealing with, but closed ears. And I had a feeling this is what was going to happen. And inevitably, that's what happens. Because with appeals, it's kind of like being at the circus and you buy 3 tickets, or a ticket where you get 3 balls to knock something down. And if you do, you win something. And if you don't knock anything down, you don't win shit. Appeals are kind of like that. You have the internal appeals branch, which is part of the WSIB system. And then you have the Workplace Safety and Insurance Appeals Tribunal, which is the external agency that has the power to overrule WSIB decisions. But that's it. You got 2. That's it. So you want to make sure that you're prepared if you're going to go that route. And incidentally, I have a video coming out on Monday that deals specifically with the issue of whether you're prepared to go to an appeal, to go to a hearing, or the tribunal, because you need to know. Otherwise, you get 2 strikes. And so you need to be prepared, so you put your best foot forward, always. But I'll talk about that on Monday. In the meantime, dealing with the WSIB, and I used to explain this to clients a lot of times, it's kind of like playing a game that you've never played before. What's the first thing that you want to do when you're going to play a game that you've never played before? Well, first thing is to learn the rules. Common sense. Most games are actually very simple in the rules, and it's easy to figure it out. Although I'm reminded by my 4.5, soon to be 5-year-old granddaughter that I missed a step. Vovô, you missed a step. You got to go back. Yeah. Vovô is the Portuguese term for grandpa. So knowing the rules is important, because the better you know the rules, the more effective you're going to be in your game. And with the WSIB, it's a game of win or lose, but the stakes are much higher, because if you lose, you don't get shit. So sometimes they need to be reminded that they made up the rules, that they wrote the rules, they came up with them. and that they need to follow their own rules. They can't circumvent it when it doesn't suit them. So, what's the first thing that gives you a bit of an idea of what the rules are? And it's the decision. The content of the decision will give you a glimpse as to what the rules are and how they're playing those rules. Now, there's the legislation, there's pre-Bill 162 legislation, and then there's Bill 162 legislation, and then Bill 99 legislation, and oh my God, it's confusing. And for people, even those who are working in this field day in and day out, sometimes have trouble navigating those rules because they can be complicated. But fortunately, for this particular exercise and this particular strategy, you don't need to know all the rules. You just need to be able to make sure that when they're telling you what rule is being applied, that you can actually confirm that that's the rule that applies, because oftentimes they don't. So you have legislation, and then from the legislation you have policies. And policies are basically their interpretation, the WSIB's interpretation, and their infinite wisdom as to how they're going to apply a particular section of the act. So let's say the Workers' Compensation Act, and that they are going through the process of calculating your earnings. And I referred to this in one of my previous videos. So they would have to quote the actual section of the act that governs the issue of total temporary disability benefits, which then incorporates a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's the section of the act. And then they have these policies. And so they basically take that section of the act and break it down into policies so that they can apply it in one way or another. And then there's different circumstances that they can take into consideration or not, and so on and so on. So I'm not going to go through a whole explanation of this because I'm going to bore you to death and I'm going to put myself to sleep in the process. Trust me, nobody wants that. So anyway, so when you look at a decision, there are 4 important elements that need to be in that decision. And sometimes they kind of skim through it. Did you ever get a decision that has 1, 2, 3 pages and you're reading it and none of it makes sense to you? Even in layman's terms? It's like, what the hell? What does this mean? I don't know what this means. Yeah, it happens. But what you need to understand and know are these 4 key elements so that you're not confused, and you can tell that person who wrote that decision that, hey, you haven't properly laid out these 4 elements. So what are they? Well, they're the facts and the circumstances of the case. So every aspect of the injury, the circumstances of the injury, the date of the injury, the type of injury, these are facts and circumstances. What you were doing at the time is as part of your normal job. Were there safety measures in place and all that kind of stuff? Some of it's not really essential, but the facts and circumstances surrounding your accident are crucial, because if they don't have it right, in other words, somebody's down on 200 Front Street or one of their offices throughout the province, and this person's sitting at a desk and they're trying to make a determination as to whether to accept the injury, whether all of these things make sense. And they get that from the Form 7, which is your employer report. They get it from the Form 6, which is your report, that you write out what happened. And then they get it from the Form 8, which is your doctor's report. So they're looking at all this information and trying to make a determination. If there are discrepancies in the facts and the circumstances between those three forms that you know because you're the person who was injured, then sometimes it's very easy to clarify those discrepancies by having either a conversation with your employer or your doctor and making sure that those discrepancies are cleared up so that this person sitting behind a desk down at Front Street or one of the other offices can make a determination. So those facts are important because they will influence the decision, but they have to be stated in the decision letter in as much detail as possible, because those details can play a huge role on whether your claim is accepted or not. So you being able to review it and say, well, hang on, that's not what happened. That's not what I was doing when I got injured. Sometimes that detail, which may appear minor, can be huge. So what do you learn from that decision letter? Well, you learn what circumstances and what facts were considered when that decision was rendered. So what's the next thing? Well, the next thing needs to be the decision maker's reasons for denying. And those reasons have to be stated and explicitly stated, not just vague. I know they like to use vague in terms and sentences, but very, very specific. So that, here's an example. Well, I was lifting and when I lifted, I felt pain in my lower back. Okay? Now, here's another statement. I was lifting a box that weighed about 200 pounds by myself. There was nobody else there. I bent over to lift it, and as I was lifting it, I felt a sharp pain in my back. You see the difference between those two? That can make a big difference. So what you expect in the reasons that's provided is that sort of detail. Again, because that detail can make a big difference on whether the claim is accepted or denied. Even if your doctor says, yeah, he was lifting something heavy and pulled a muscle in his back. The more detail your doctor has and puts in that Form 8, the more clear the picture is going to be for that person sitting behind that desk trying to make this decision. Number 3, what is the third item that needs to be in that decision? Well, sometimes decision makers, and I've experienced this in the past, they make a decision based on what they think is fair, and their opinions, their personal opinions on the matter, they don't mean shit. It has to be backed up by policy. So the policy or policies, because it may be more than one, need to be able to support that decision that this decision maker made. And then the fourth one that goes hand in hand with the third is the legislation. So they need to state the section of either the Workers' Compensation Act or the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. Because they may have certain sections that are numbered differently in one or the other, and it may not have anything to do with how your claim is adjudicated and under what legislative authority. So you're going to glean from that decision, and every decision must have this, and if it doesn't, you need to insist to get it. Because one thing I found out, dealing with these people day in and day out, there's a lot of lazy people there. And some of them are just overworked. And when you're overworked and you're trying to get through your work, you're going to miss things. You're going to miss things. This is going to happen. It's inevitable. So whatever reasons they give you, if those 4 things aren't clearly defined in that decision, there's a problem. You need to seek clarification. Now, I'm going to put those 4 things up on the screen so you can see them, make notes. But you can also refer to this video at any point in the future if you need to. So now that you've got the issue of the decision, and you need to have that so you understand the decision, because how do you know what you're going to do next if you don't even understand the decision itself? You can't. So, what's the next step then? What are your options? Well, your options are one of 2, or both. So one is you appeal it. I recommend that you definitely get those 4 items as clear and concise as possible before you go to a hearing or proceed with an appeal. But you want to protect yourself in appeal time limit legislation, so you appeal it. Now you're protected. What's the other thing you can do? Well, I talked about it in my videos extensively, I think the last 2 videos, about the reconsideration process. It is your best tool, the best, at getting issues addressed with the WSIB and forcing them to apply the rules, their rules, the ones that they have created. And so how do you do that? Well, it starts with your reconsideration. As I explained the other day, we have a 3-step process with WSIBsettlements.com that you can use. It's all there. It's done for you. You don't have to write anything, know the law, nothing like that. Very easy to do, so you can cover all 3 levels. So why is it good to proceed with the reconsideration, even though you've appealed it? Well, because the reconsideration process takes less time than going to an appeal. You can wait 6 months or more. I don't know what their backlogs are now, but it's pretty significant to get to a hearing. Whereas even applying all 3 steps of the system that we've developed within the reconsideration process, if you have to apply all 3, you can have that done. I would say probably 6 weeks. 2 months at the outset, if you have to go the full 3 levels and it's a more complicated situation. And I think you can actually do it in less time if you apply our follow-up strategy system to make sure that they stay on top of it and work the 2 hand in hand. And that's why they were created, for that purpose. But it takes less time than going like the appeal route. Remember, they rely on your ignorance in a lot of times because they think, he doesn't know any better. He's probably going to give up and not even go to a hearing. Or he's just going to accept it. Because they assume that you're an idiot like me. There could be a number of reasons why they deny a claim. And even if they haven't stated them properly in those four items I just spoke of, I can guarantee you that if your reconsideration goes beyond that decision maker, so now you're into step 2, the manager will bend over backwards to make sure that all those reasons are stated. Why? Because the manager doesn't want to go on further. Remember, it is their duty to state those 4 items so that you understand, so that you know what you need to do. Which brings me to the next one, which is, if you go from the original decision maker and you requested that reconsideration and that person's being stubborn or egotistic, or whatever the case is, you go to the manager. Let's assume that the manager looks at it and says, okay, well, I need to add a couple of items here that weren't properly considered in the original decision. So now, revealing information, because they can't keep denying and just say, well, just because. Well, yeah, just because. Yep, just because. No. So now they're giving you more. And I'll give you an example. And these are all things that have happened over almost 30 years of dealing with these people. Well, I reviewed the case manager's decision, and I noted here that there's reference to a medical report from this specialist, but that medical report wasn't obtained and not considered part of the decision. So now the manager can communicate that to his or her subordinate and say, hey, get this report so your decision is more complete, more thorough, forcing that original decision maker to reconsider their decision. And even if it's not reconsidered and stays the same, the manager already told you indirectly that that report was important. And if that report was obtained and showed what you were claiming, they would accept it. So the manager made his or her decision in essence, by omission. No, not by omission, by default. But let's say that it doesn't change the original decision. And you go to step 3 in the strategy that I talked about the other day. So now you're going to the director. And I can tell you one thing, directors do not like to do work for managers or case managers. They have way more important stuff to deal with, but they can't just throw it off their plate. And here's another one, and they've tried doing this with me in the past. Well, your file's at appeals now, so it doesn't make any sense for us to touch it. No. There's nothing in the Act, the Workers' Compensation Act or the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, that states that I can't go to an appeal with my case and object to a decision and concurrently have the matter reconsidered within Section 121 of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. There's nothing that states that. So they tried that with me. It didn't work. So don't let them try it with you. Now it's on the director's table, and he or she has to make a review and make a decision. Now, let me just take one step back. You know the manager who said to the case manager, go get this report? None of that stuff is going to be in writing to you. But if that manager ends up reviewing that matter again as part of the reconsideration, that manager has to own that decision. It's a reconsideration decision, and it's clearly stated in the policy dealing with Section 121, which deals with reconsiderations. And the next one up, the director, if he or she decides that they're going to do the same dance that their subordinates did, they have to own it too. So what does all this tell you? Well, If you have to go to all three levels, you're going to learn stuff that if by chance they are so blind and so egotistic and unwilling to recognize their error, when it's time for you to go to that hearing, so now you've been waiting, you will know more as to how to address and how to be prepared for that hearing. And I'm going to talk extensively more on this topic on Monday. And the theme is, are you ready to go to a hearing? I'm going to talk about that extensively. But anyway, so at the end of the day, there's a lot that can happen, and there's lots of motivation for people within the executive level, the case manager, to overrule his or her decision by getting more information on the manager's direction, or the manager having to reconsider it again, or the director. Now, these people all have a motivation factor to be thorough with the decision-making process. And although a lot of times it may seem like it's just because of the money, and in my opinion, 8 times out of 10 it is, at some point they have to be able to demonstrate their experience, their expertise. Because if they're considered or want to be considered to move up the ladder, and they clearly show in handling a reconsideration request that they don't know their shit, they ain't going anywhere. So experience and a desire to move up the ladder is the motivator for these people. So do not discount the reconsideration process, because it is the most effective tool that I've ever used over and over and over again. So friends, I know I've left you with a lot of thoughts, a lot to think about. I'm also going to put up the factors that I believe are important, and that going through the reconsideration process is the way to go to target both options, which is appeals and the reconsideration. And I'm going to put that up on the screen as well, so you can see it, so it makes sense to you. And you can always refer to it as you need to. But yes, it is definitely the most effective tool that I could ever impart for you. And the beauty is all of this is laid out in wsibsettlements.com, where you can do all of it. You don't need anybody to hold your hand or do it for you. You don't need to know the law or understand the law or the process and how the process works, because it's all laid out for you, and there's support. So if you have any questions, you send a quick email to customer success team at wsibsettlements.com, and you get your response, and you know exactly what to do. So you get a lot of support that way. Okay, friends. So anyway, I kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. So Monday, I'm going to talk about, are you ready for a hearing? Even if you're paralegal or your lawyer or your union rep or family member that's helping you and all that, even though they're all telling you, are you ready? I can tell you with absolute certainty, I've handled thousands of appeals. And I've stated before that about 80% of our cases were won without having to go to a hearing. And that's correct. When I talk about I've handled thousands of appeals, in one case alone, there may be a need for more than one appeal. There could be a number of different things that are being appealed, which aren't necessarily taking place concurrently. And therefore, the best route to go is through the appeal process. But with over 10,000 clients, I'm sure you can imagine how the numbers are there. At the end of the day, making sure that you are ready for that appeal is important. Because if you're not, there's a lot of time that's been wasted. The stress and anxiety level is heightened, and it creates a whole lot of financial problems for you and your family. So I want to be able to give you what works and what doesn't, and tell you or give you the information so you can think for yourself and say, yeah, I'm not really sure I have those details, or I'm not really sure if I have that medical quite yet. I'm still in treatment, or I'm going for a different type of treatment. Whatever the case is, there are all sorts of factors that are important to be considered so that when you make that decision that you're ready for a hearing, you are. And you'll know that when the air is let out and you have that moment of, okay, I'm ready for this, I can do this. Then you know you're ready. Okay, friends? So that's coming up Monday. If you didn't watch my video yesterday, which dealt with the recalculation of the earnings basis for claims between April of 1985 and January 1st, 1998, I recommend that you watch it. If you know people who were injured within that period of time, make sure they watch it because there could be a lot of money on the table for them. I'm talking a lot of money. And you don't want to miss out on that. So just a reminder on there. And as always, friends, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It's completely free. And it helps me to build the channel. Also, please share my videos with others that you think might help them. That the content is something that could help them in their particular situation. Sometimes you'll know people in your family, your friends who are having issues with the WSIB, and they wouldn't necessarily tell you because it's a private matter, and sometimes it's embarrassing. So they may not necessarily tell you. So don't assume that they know or that they're having issues. Just share the video. Let them decide for themselves. You could be throwing them a lifeline. And give me a thumbs up if you like my content. If there's other stuff that you would like me to talk about, mention it in the comments or send me an email and I'll work it into one of my videos. I've got content for the next 20 years. Well, not really, just exaggerating, but quite a long time. I've got a lot of 30 years of stuff to be able to share. And watch my shorts. Sometimes I'll come out with a short. It's a 60-second or less little clip that will give you a bit of a hint as to what I'm going to be talking about next. Okay, friends. So thanks again for taking this time to listen to me. I hope I've left you with some useful tools, and enjoy this amazing Friday. Take care, friends.